The guy who is so unbelievably clear on Israel and not exactly in the same boat as Barack Obama is on with us today. Now, I don't know how I should feel about him because I'm told that everybody on the right is just a racist. He's black. Barack Obama is black. They have that in common, but their policies are completely different.
Man, what a conundrum.
I've always thought that mattered, but apparently not. You're going to have to decide whether race trumps brains, content of the character over the color of the skin. Hey, we should write that down. Somebody should say that.
This is the Glenn Beck program.
I was in Chicago to give a speech, and a guy walked on stage that I think somebody said to me, "Oh, this is the Godfather's Pizza guy. You should see him." And I'm like, "Oh, the Godfather's Pizza guy. Okay." I don't think I've ever said this, watching anybody ever before. I said to one of the guys with me, I said, "Could you please ask if I can meet him?"
And this was at a time, too, it has to be said, when you were so done with politics, you just didn't care. You didn't want to be anybody. You didn't want to talk about politics.
Yeah, we went to this.
He just blew us away.
This was a political event, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And I went kicking and screaming to this event because I didn't want to be associated with politicians. And this guy, when he gave this speech, he finished, and then he just said, I think he just said his last line.
I think he just turned around and walked off.
Turned around, walked off. Didn't even wait for the applause, nothing. He was just like, that's the way you fix it. And turned around, walked off.
It was fantastic.
It was brilliant. Brilliant. His name is Herman Cain, and he is on with us now. Hello, Herman, how are you?
Glenn Beck, I am fantastic. Thank you for having me on your show.
I'd like to have you on. In the next few weeks, I'd like to do an hour with some of the presidential candidates that America doesn't know too well, and I'd like to invite you for that.
Invitation accepted. We will make it happen.
All right. Well, you might want to consider it here for a second because Herman, I have when we talk about you, and I've told the story about first time I saw you, I think you're great, and I see you from time to time in the news, and I think you're great. But I will tell you that there are three things that the listeners have brought up. One of them, Pat brought up. That I have questions on, and you're not entering a hostile room, but I am going to ask you tough questions. So here's the, may I?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Here's the first one. You were a Fed chairman?
Yes. I was chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. As you know, there are 12 banks, and they all have their citizens board, and I got elected to the Fed chairmanship for the Federal Reserve Kansas City Bank back in the mid-'90s. It might have been around 1995, 96. This is when Alan Greenspan was the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors out of Washington, D.C. Yes, I was proud of the work of serving on that board for the following reasons. That Federal Reserve didn't do any of the stuff that this Federal Reserve is doing. Secondly, Alan Greenspan never allowed the Fed to become politicized. And the other difference between today and then is that we didn't have this $14 trillion debt to deal with. And as a result, they didn't have to inflate our currency the way this Federal Reserve Board is doing it. So, yes, I did serve on the board. There was a citizens board that they have for each one of them, and that was back in the 1990s.
All right. Now, I know there because of the 12 different boards, that there are a few of them, and I'm trying to remember if Kansas City is one of the more conservative ones. I think it is.
It is.
There are Fed chairmans, Fed, what do you call them at that level? Presidents that actually feed us information like, okay, this is really screwed up. I mean, there are those members of the Fed that agree with me more than disagree with me.
In fact, Glenn, let me insert this. Tom Honig is the president of the Kansas City Federal Reserve Bank. You know, he's the full-time guy who runs things. He is one of the ones that has pushed back on many of these decisions that Ben Bernanke has been making over the past couple of years. When I was chairman of the Federal Reserve Board of Kansas City, Tom Honig was the guy that I, along with the rest of the board members, recommended to Alan Greenspan and the Board of Governors to be president for exactly that reason. He has stood by the principles that the Federal Reserve was supposed to stand by.
All right. Are you for or against auditing the Fed?
I do not object to auditing the Fed. I absolutely do not object to auditing the Fed. What I said was, it's not going to be an issue that I'm going to carry the water on, but I would not object to it. It's just not an issue that I want to take a leadership role on.
How come?
Because I don't believe they're going to find anything, to be perfectly honest, based upon what I know about the Fed. Secondly, they have internal controls out of the wazoo. I saw them. I was there on the board and, got familiar with some of them. So this is why I would rather focus on what do we need to do to truly boost this economic growth. Lowering corporate tax rate, personal tax rate, taking the capital gains tax rate to zero, suspending taxes on repatriated foreign profits so they can come home, provide a real payroll tax holiday of the full 6.2% for employees and employers, and then you make them permanent until we can totally replace the tax code with the national sales tax, which is the fair tax, which I support.
Okay. So far, all of that, that all sounds great, and I'm loving that. Let me go to the fair tax.
Yeah.
Explain to me how, and I'm not a fair tax expert. I have not. This tax thing has not been one of my issues.
Right.
Other than abolishing the IRS, the fair tax always has bothered me, and explain where I'm wrong.
Okay.
The thing that bothers me about our tax code is it's 80,000 pages. And any special interest group can come in and make the argument that, no, we need the break here. We need the break here. That's why I'm for a flat tax. Right. There's no questions on it. A national sales tax, how does that not turn into exactly what we have? Just huge taxes on, let's say, yachts because yachts become unpopular, or trans fats because trans fats become unpopular.
Right.
How does it not turn into that?
Well, first of all, the fair tax, which is the national sales tax, it is tax on consumption and not tax on income. The Steve Forbes flat tax version was still on income. And as long as it's on income, you have the lobbyists come in trying to lobby for their organization that they represent to try to get a favor in there, and that's why we have what we have today. Now, with the fair tax, the politicians, Congress cannot change that statutory rate today. That's what's in the legislation at 23%. They can't change it without a super majority vote, which means that the American public is going to know about it before they start messing with it. So this is how we don't end up going back to the same type of system that we have today, because individuals determine their tax based upon their purchase behavior, not the government based upon your income.
But Herman, how do we get rid of, it just seems like such a fairy tale that we could ever get rid of the IRS. How do you actually...
Don't get us wrong. We're for this.
We want to, but to physically get rid of the IRS is virtually impossible at this point. What are there 56 co-sponsors of this bill? How are you ever going to get enough people on board with this?
You'd need a constitutional amendment to do it.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. You got two questions there. I'm going to answer both of them. The first one is, in the fair tax legislation, which is H.R. 2125, it has a provision in there that it does not go into effect until the 16th Amendment is repealed. In other words, it's in there. It can't go into effect until the 16th Amendment is repealed, which is the amendment that allows the government to tax income. So, secondly, how do we get this thing done? You get the American people to understand it so they can support it and they can demand it. That is the difference. This is why, as president, I'm not going to try to get the fair tax passed immediately. I want to do those other points that I indicated because we need an immediate boost to this economy. But during that first couple of years, I will be educating and informing the public so they understand it. And if they understand it, then we'll have the public support that we need in order to pass the fair tax, which would also then abolish the IRS.
Okay. Do we have Herman till the bottom of the hour? How much time do we have with her? Can we keep you till the bottom of the hour or not?
Yep, yeah.
Okay, good. Let me take a quick break and then we'll come back and we'll continue our conversation. With Herman Cain running for president, if you haven't decided, and I just saw a poll in New Hampshire, 87% of Republicans say, no idea who I'm going to vote for. Consider Herman Cain.